Anyway, the thing I saw for Tobias Harris asking for a max contract and how he's going about it's pretty funny. Either way, Tobias Harris has interest from the Mavericks, Pistons, Pelicans, Spurs, and Jazz. Look, I think the Pistons are the most likely because because you know what? If Troy Weaver stayed, maybe the Pistons. How does this go down? So this is coming from Chris Haynes of the Bleacher Report. Look, I know some people are going to be like, he's not a legit player. He doesn't show up in the big games. He's streaky. You're not a big fan of his. Who cares? Look, in the regular season, I think he's a solid third option. He was 61st in points per game, 50th in rebounds, 58th in steals, 58th field goal percentage. Look, he's 161st this past year in usage rate. So he is a fifth option on a really good team. And if he wants to be a scorer and get a lot of money, he's going to go to a bad team. But if he wants to be a guy on a championship team, he's going to be a guy who I think can be consistent. And unfortunately, he's been judged by his contract, which is one of the highest paid guys, and not by his productivity. And I think he brings you a guy that he's an 18, 7-3 guy. He's averaged that for a few years, and his shooting splits are all right. I think the Pistons make sense for him. I mean, 3 years, 80 from the Spurs would make a lot of sense for both sides. But a free agent, Tobias Harris, I think he's expected to leave Philadelphia. That's what Chris Haynes is saying. Harris wants to move on, and Philadelphia is prioritizing opening up cap space. The good news is he's not expected to have any shortage of suitors. The Dallas Mavericks, the Detroit Pistons, and New Orleans Pelicans, and San Antonio Spurs and Utah Jazz are all expected to have interest in signing Harris. Now, the Pelicans and Mavs would want to potentially use the mid-level exception for Tobias Harris. What does that mean? Well, the mid-level exception for 24 to 25 this upcoming year, teams that are all right. So basically, the standard mid-level exception is 12.8. And then 13.5 the following year. So basically, it would be like a $26.3 million 2-year deal if they did it, if they're a non-tax paying team. But if they are a tax paying team, it's like 5.1, which if the Pelicans are looking to sign somebody looking to sign Tobias Harris to the standard mid-level exception, that means they could potentially be looking at signing. He's looking at signing. The crazy thing is the Mavericks are a second apron team, so they could only offer him actually $5 million. So this is wild to me. As Chris Haynes is saying, a guy, Tobias Harris, who averaged just under 18.6 half rebounds, 3 assists, and he's about to be 32. He shot 48% from the field, 35 from 3. But that the Mavs, Pelicans, two teams that are like, I believe, over the luxury tax, which they could only offer him $5 million a year, which would basically be a 2-year, $10 million. Definitely have a player option because he would opt out next year and retest. So if he doesn't get a good offer from the Pistons, the Spurs, or the Jazz, we're basically hearing he would then go to the Mavericks and Pelicans on a 1-year deal to make $5 million on a prove-it deal and go retest it next year. That is wild. That is wild. And I think that's wild. That's wild. That's wild. If I were the Philadelphia, I would try to sign and trade him. So we're going to say a sign and trade to the Spurs, and Jazz and Pistons are the most realistic. So let's go over to Fanspo and do that real quickly and then see what that could look like. I think that's where, if you're looking at Philadelphia, we're going to do, I like the 3-year, $80 million for Tobias. Not a bad deal. And there you go. That's great. Recommended salary based on performance. 3-year, 60.7. I like it. I like it, ladies and gentlemen. So we'll do first. Let's go ahead and do Detroit. With this, you can only send back half the money, so it can only be $10 million that Detroit could be sending them back. So Troy Brown Jr., really back to the other trade that we did earlier today, I think would be actually the trade tax. I think you get away with this. Yeah, outgoing. That's 8.7. If you really wanted, yeah, I don't see any other deal that you could just be like, oh, tack that and throw those in there. Like Marcus Sasser is not being thrown in this deal. And yeah, I feel like that would be the deal right here. And maybe you go, hey, give us the 54th pick in this year's draft. Give us, you know, 3 seconds. And this would be the deal with the Pistons. This is not a bad deal. Yeah, you lose Tobias Harris, but you walk away with 3 second-round picks, 1 in this year's draft. So technically, you could have 4 players. Not a bad deal, okay? Not a bad deal. Next, we got Utah and San Antonio. What could Utah offer you? Again, it's $10 million that they could send back because of how it's working. So you'd hear year 7. I mean, we're here. They had Darius Baisley already on the roster once. Do they bring him back? Do they also bring back Kenny Lofton? Because the easiest deal would be, I believe, something along these lines, right? Yeah, like you could argue that this deal right here, like I just said, I didn't send Tobias Harris. My apology, ladies and gentlemen. But right here, you put yourself Tobias Harris for, I guess this is a lot of bigs. Like we just gave you 4 front court players. Like why would they do this? Why would they do this? But hypothetically, they could do this in this deal. They dish off of $20 million and then they save themselves, and they can only take back half. So that would be the deal. I don't see any other player being available in that sense from Utah. So let's go ahead to the last one, and that's San Antonio, who might actually have the best package to offer. Again, you're sending over a $20 million contract on Tobias Harris. You can only take back 10. And looking around, again, it would have to be a combination of like Champagny, Branham, Charles, and send us CD. And then you would assume maybe they give you the 8th pick in this year's draft. But there's so many young guys you just gave up in that deal. I personally don't see this being realistic. But in this case, yeah, you give them a point, you give them a guard, 2 wings, and a big, and the 8th pick in this year's draft. I still think that's an overpay. That's if they were to sign and trade. How realistic is that? You don't really know, but it's definitely something to talk about because of how the draft is being viewed and what are actually like viewed as decent trade assets. I don't know. That's up to the jury to decide. And we'll find out in a couple days. So for me, I think just being able to see what moves you could potentially make and how you could improve your team is really going to hinge on reading the market correctly and making sure that you make the right moves. What are those moves? I feel like definitely going to be dealer's choice. But that's where I want to hear your guys' thoughts. If you're a Tobias Harris fan, what do you guys expect? Seriously. I don't know what you expect. All right, let's talk about the next thing, and that is